Today we are finishing up this series we've been on Methodist, on our Methodist heritage and theology, and we have covered some of the big topics of grace and sin and free will, and we have covered some of the very exciting topics of the Wesleyan quadrilateral and the general rules, right? Such very exciting topics those are. It is no wonder at all then that John Wesley and his band of the Holy Club, when they were at Oxford, were accused of being enthusiasts because they were so enthusiastic about their faith. That actually is a true story. That is what they were. They were accused of being a little bit too excited, not necessarily over geometric shapes or rules. Those things came later, and that is still kind of another story about our heritage. But today we have another great and wonderful and exciting piece of our Methodist heritage and theology, and that is the membership vows. Right? Such exciting, wonderful things, aren't it? Isn't it? Wow, my English is not good. Everyone's looking at me like, you said that. I'm sorry. Julie, pretend you didn't hear me say that. My grammar will get better, maybe. Now, those vows really should be more exciting than they sound. And I mean that in all seriousness. They really should be more exciting because our vows, when we take them, when we join, it tell us exactly how we can support the church through them. And if you remember them, because we've said them many times, through those vows that we take to support the church through our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service, and our witness, right? I love that we use these every Sunday as a part of our offerings, and this is what we do. Is our offerings are not just the things that we put in offering plates or whatever it is, but it is a reminder of these vows that we take. And they're really so much that they can guide us and help us and lead us, and it's good that we do them. But we're going to kind of continue to pile on things for just a minute, because if those things weren't enough, Paul in Colossians adds more to this list of things that we should be doing on a regular basis all the time as a part of our Christian faith. Paul says this in Colossians. He says to put on holy ones and beloved. He says, put on compassionate hearts, kindness, meekness, and patience, bearing with each other, forgiving each other, and to put on love. Who is ready to do all of these things? Anyone excited, ready to get it all done? A couple of folks saying, try to. It's a big list, isn't it? Kind of a hard list. Have you ever got stuck on that question, looking at something like this that goes, how do I get it all done? I mean, you look at this list and you go, how in the world are we supposed to get all of those things you've done? Or I'll get through all of those things. If you've been with us in Sunday school or the youth have seen some of these, we have videos that we watch every week as a part of that. And anytime we would get to one of these points like this, the answer, of course, always is this. It is John Wesley comes in and he has all the answers that we need, and then he has this little smile on his face, generally complete with sound effects that will show up there. And John Wesley has all of the answers. Well, to be fair about today, we aren't going to have a story from John Wesley, but we will have a story about someone named John. Most of the time he goes by Jack, but it still works. We have a couple minutes to go before we get to that point. Because the argument I'm going to make is this, that asking how do we get it all done is the wrong question. And if you're asking that question, you're not going to be able to get it all done. That just is how that's going to work. How many of us find ourselves asking that question, though, on lots of different things? Whether it is things related to the church and our faith, or whether it is things that are related to just everyday living. I mean, I've seen some of y'all's calendars. I'm not sure where you find room to write anything else on those calendars sometimes, because, and I wonder how you get it all done. And we ask it sometimes with projects that we're working on, or family things that are going on, or whatever it is, we say, how am I going to get all of this done? And we end up asking these questions for two reasons most of the time. The first one is one that is, we are overwhelmed in the moment. But we know the moment is going to come to an end. Either there is a date by which things are going to finish, or there is something that says this is the end of the project, or even you just can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you know you're going to come to an end point. That's one time. We're still overwhelmed in the moment. But we know that it's going to come to an end. It's going to finish, and we'll be through that time. The other times, though, are when we don't really know when that end is coming, because we can't see what that end looks like. We're looking down and we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we good and well know that it's just another train with its light on, that it's not actually an end that's down there. We don't know what any sign of that end is supposed to look like. We don't have a date when it's all going to be done. And we are in that moment, we are just overwhelmed by everything that is going on. How do we get through it? How do we get it all done when you can't even see what the end is supposed to look like? This is where we get to that story of John, or Jack in this case. I need to put another $1 in the Jack story jar. Perhaps at some point I will have his college paid for by the time he gets old enough. Do you all know who is always super excited to come to church on Sunday mornings? I mean, if you sit here at all when he comes in here, you know that Jack is super excited every Sunday to come and to be here at church. And I love that he gets to grow up in the church. I think it is so much fun. I'm someone who, I was almost a preacher's kid growing up. Not that my dad or my mom were ever going to be preachers. It was just I spent that much time at the church growing up. This is how much time I spent at the church. I knew the trick to get into the toy cabinet in the nursery without the key. That was how much time I spent at the church. I knew where everything was. I was comfortable in the church. But there is a big difference between being almost a preacher's kid and being a preacher's kid. Jack doesn't know any difference between home and here. Both of them are home for him. So he loves it here. Sometimes in the middle of the day, especially if it's just us around, he'll just kind of look at us and he'll say, I miss my church friends. But just know that he's talking about y'all when he does that. And other times, sometimes in the middle of the day, sometimes if he was way too wound up when he went to bed at night, and therefore is not going to sleep the entire night because he's going to wake up in the middle of the night to go run around a little bit, like maybe last night, he'll come in. He was in our bed at one point in the middle of the night, and he just looked at us in all the seriousness and earnestness and excitement of a 3-year-old and said, is it church day yet? Or, but it's 2:30 in the morning. It is not church day yet. It's coming. And then go back to sleep. He loves it. Now, why is all that important? Because do you know who isn't asking the question, how do I get all of it done? Jack never asked that question about church stuff. Now, he is, being the precocious 3-year-old he has asked a version of that question at different points in times about things. Now, his idea of getting everything done is making sure he gets his puzzles done, or he gets all this, the fun things of life taken care of. But he's asked those kinds of questions, so it's not that he doesn't know the question, but he never asked that question about church because he just naturally does all of these things. He supports the church with his prayers, his presence, his gifts, his service, and his witness, at least insofar as someone who is only 3 years old can do. He is able to do those things. Well, let's stick with Jack for a second, but take a step back, because do you know who else isn't asking that question anymore? How do I get it all done? The folks that were lining the streets of Jerusalem that first time when Jesus was coming in, who were waving their palm branches high in the air, who were yelling for Jesus, a lot like when Jack has entered the room, when you hear Daddy on Sunday morning, because he is here and he is excited. They weren't asking that question either. They weren't concerned with doing all the things. Rather, all of the things were getting done because that's just who they were in the moment. Now, my easy answer, if I wanted to finish the sermon here, would just be to say, all right, now you all go out and be Palm Sunday people. That would be this very churchy answer, but would tell you absolutely nothing. So there's a little bit more to it. The vows that we take give us direction for what comes from our faith. When things are going well, we don't always necessarily have to focus too much on those vows because things are going good. We're doing those things. They're going great. They're fine. They're good. We may look back to them and say, okay, just for a little bit of added help and support and guidance, but we're good. Things are fine. But when we need those vows the most, or when we're in one of those places where we are overwhelmed, and here's where these vows become so important. When we're asking the question, how do we get it all done? And not only do we not have an answer for how we're going to get it all done, we don't even know where to start or where to look. That's the time when we look to those vows. Not because they are going to give us explicit answers, but when life is hard, when we can't see the end, and we don't even know where to start, they are what get us started. They don't start with a statement on how much we're supposed to give to the church. They don't start with a requirement for how many new believers we're going to bring into the church every year, but rather they start here with our prayers. Every time you pray, you're supporting the church. Even, or most especially when, those prayers are you asking God, what do I need to do? I don't know what to do next. That is a prayer that is in support of the church. And it's important to start with prayer, but maybe the most important one on this list is our presence. Being at church or being in a church-related activity, and here's the plot twist on this, it doesn't even necessarily mean being at this particular church, but if you are in church, if you are present with God, with others, and sharing in your faith in this kind of place, you are being in God's presence. You are supporting the church. Every time you're doing something along those lines, you are pointing yourself in the right direction, and that's what's important. One of the biggest mistakes that, but I think at least it's a mistake that at least is headed in the right direction that the self-help movement makes right now is that when we become overwhelmed, it says turn in and focus on yourself so you can figure that out. I'm like, well, that's a good starting place. But we need something more than that. Because if we're just focusing on ourselves, we're never going to find our way out of it. We're just going to spin around in circles. But better yet is to focus on ourselves, but keep our direction lined up with God. Keep focused on God, and He will show us a way through all of this. In those moments, God helps us to see things where we wouldn't otherwise see them. To show us possibilities that we didn't know were a thing, but we are focused on Him. And it's amazing what happens, that in the middle of that, sometimes we'll find ourselves looking, and the other things that we were struggling with will work themselves out because we're focused on the one who is in front of us. Your presence with God at church doesn't just support the church, but it supports the church by you growing in your faith, growing in your relationship with God. Our gifts. This doesn't just mean monetary offerings. Sometimes it can mean any number of things. It can mean our talents. It can mean our time. And we give our gifts not because the church needs them. We do. But it's not the need that drives things. Rather, it's the giving of ourselves to the church that is important. Giving to our faith that's the key, because that draws us closer to God, especially in times when we don't know what to do, where you don't know how we're going to get it all done. If we can do those things with God, we can fall back on those gifts that God has given us, then we will find a way through. We look to our service now. We're getting to the things that need to be done. How can we serve? But remember where this comes in the list. It comes towards the bottom end of this list. After all the other parts, when we get here, we've probably begun to see some things. Begin to see something that is helping us to say, here's where I go next. Here's what I was missing before. Here's where I've been getting overwhelmed, but now I'm seeing that how I'm going to get through that and how I can find peace in the midst of the things that are keeping me up at night. Where maybe even we begin to see that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not just another train coming through. We are called to serve the church, not out of obligation, but out of faith and God's direction in our lives and our witness. Notice what comes before we get to this last one on here. And in fact, in Sunday school, we talked this morning that witness was not added to our membership vows until the early 2000s. Many of us took our first membership vows as the church long before witness was added to this. But everything else comes before this. Our witness is important, but in times when other things are overwhelming us, or frustrating us, or just aren't working the way we want to, we aren't ready to be there. And that's okay. That's why being Methodist is so important, because we have such a great focus on grace. Grace gives us the time and the patience that we need so that when we are ready to witness, then we're ready. We don't have to try and rush that along, but God's grace gives us the time that we need. Our vows are not meant to be hard and controlling and debilitating. They're meant to draw us close to God and give us the support we need when we don't know what to do. Or they're meant to give us the extra little bit of boost that we need in times when life is good and things are working out the way they're supposed to. But they help give us that little bit of extra that will take us even farther than we could go on our own. Most importantly today, though, this is where I'm going to give the churchy answer. Go and be Palm Sunday people. Don't try to live under a burden of obligation, but work to live in the joy and the peace that comes from Jesus Christ. Not because we have to have everything worked out, but because he has given us all that we need to either overcome or to really celebrate. So let us be a people on this Palm Sunday to go out and live that life. Live that life in the name of the one who showed us that it was possible in a way that we had never known before. But let us go and live this out in the name of Jesus Christ.